When I received the formal invitation to the reading of the will, my hands trembled in a way I couldn't control. The envelope was heavy, rigid, almost cold, as if it carried not just a piece of paper, but a sentence. My father had passed away a few weeks earlier, and I still didn't quite know how to cope with the void he left behind. Our relationship had never been perfect. In fact, it was far from it. But there was a silent respect between us, a kind of raw affection, full of flaws, that only those who live within a complex family can understand. He didn't say, "I love you," but he showed up when I needed him most. He wasn't affectionate, but he was present in the moments that truly mattered. That kind of presence that goes unnoticed in everyday life, but that is missed when it disappears. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, the air felt heavier than it should have. It was like entering a place where nobody really wanted to be, but everyone pretended they did. The atmosphere smelled of old wood, paper stored for too long, and perfumes too expensive to be worn at a time like this. The leather armchairs lined up around the long desk seemed to watch me, waiting for me to choose my place, or my role in this story. My relatives were almost all there, each with their characteristic posture. My Aunt Clara, with her pearl necklace that she insisted on touching every 3 seconds, as if the memory of wealth calmed her. My cousin Arthur, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, an expression of superiority, as if he already knew exactly what he would inherit. My brothers, both of them, sitting side by side as if they were a secure and unbeatable unit, confidants since childhood, always leaving me out of important family decisions. Everyone exchanged quick glances when I entered, but no one spoke to me. It was as if I were an accidental guest, someone they didn't expect to see there, or perhaps someone they expected to get the smallest share, or none at all. Truth is, since I was little, I felt this silent division. They saw my father one way, and I saw him another. They grew up close, more within that circle of heirs that seems to form naturally in some families. I, on the other hand, have always been somewhat on the margins, not for lack of love, but because I never fit into that game of appearances, the veiled disputes, the social demands that family loved to maintain. The lawyer entered the room without smiling. He adjusted his glasses, opened his briefcase, and asked everyone to sit down. The tension only increased, the sound of chairs scraping, someone's muffled throat clearing, the click of the lawyer's pen. Everything seemed amplified, as if each sound were a warning. Something important is about to happen. As he organized the papers, I noticed how anxious everyone was. My relatives weren't there to mourn my father's death. They weren't there to honor his memory. They were there to find out what they would receive. For many of them, it was almost a social event, an opportunity to confirm what they already believed was rightfully theirs. Justice, in their minds, meant receiving more than the other. It meant being recognized as the favorite, the deserving one. It meant leaving that room with goods, numbers, titles, properties. I, on the other hand, didn't know what to expect. I didn't have grand expectations. My father never promised anything. He never made a point of putting me on the same pedestal as others. In fact, he always seemed to keep a kind of secret from me, a sort of emotional reserve that no one else noticed. Sometimes I had the impression that he wanted to protect me from something, or someone, but I was never sure. Maybe it was just a childish thought, kept inside an adult who was still trying to understand his own father. The lawyer asked for silence, and, for the first time that afternoon, the room was completely quiet. I could only hear my own heart beating, louder than it should. He began reading. Formalities, legal declarations, phrases that seemed taken from a manual. Each listed asset caused glances to meet: the beach house, the stocks, the commercial property, the savings. And, while each name was mentioned and associated with an asset, I felt that mine wasn't coming. People received their shares as if receiving trophies. Some already had a ready smile, almost as if they had been expecting exactly that. And me? Nothing. Until the lawyer paused awkwardly. He adjusted his glasses again, cleared his throat, and then said my name. But the way he said it wasn't the same tone he used with the others. There was something different there. It wasn't contempt, nor superiority. It was a weight, a real weight. They all looked at me at the same time, some with curiosity, others with contempt, others with pity. "For you," the lawyer said, "there is only one item." I felt as if the furniture in the room was moving away, as if the air was getting colder. One item. Was that the moment when I should have felt humiliated, ridiculed? Maybe so. Maybe that's exactly what everyone expected, especially since their reaction left no doubt. Some hid smiles, others raised eyebrows, as if thinking, serves you right. But before any emotion could take shape within me, the lawyer added, "Your father left you a recorded message." And then, at that exact second, a phrase echoed in my mind. I just never imagined that my fate would be decided by a recorded message. Everything changed in that instant, not because it was insignificant, but because it was different. And my father never did anything different without a reason. When the lawyer announced a brief recess before continuing to read the rest of the document, the atmosphere in the room changed as if someone had switched off what little courtesy remained. Chairs were dragged impatiently, bodies shifted in different directions, and each family member revealed, in small, almost imperceptible gestures, what they truly felt: greed, anxiety, competitiveness, and a cynicism that needed no words to be understood. My Aunt Clara was the first to stand up. She straightened her expensive dress, adjusted the pearl necklace that seemed to be part of her body, and walked to the side table where there was water and coffee. But she wasn't thirsty. It was all an act. Every time she wanted to appear in control, she fiddled with something: a glass, a necklace, a ring. It was her way of convincing herself that she was still on top, that nothing could shake her, that the will, for her, would only be confirmation of what she had always believed, that she was my father's true favorite, that she would always be treated as a priority. Cousin Arthur didn't bother to hide his smile. He looked at me as if I were looking at an insignificant detail on the wall. He crossed his arms, leaned back, and let out a short but deliberate laugh, as if to say, "I knew it. I always knew you wouldn't receive anything of value." This kind of behavior has always been typical of him. Arthur grew up believing that the world owed him something simply for existing. My father never had the patience to flatter him, but Arthur never realized it, or pretends not to. My two brothers were leaning against the window, talking quietly, but not too quietly. They always had this habit of talking with their hand over their mouth, as if they were keeping grand secrets, when in reality, they were just feeding gossip. Looking from afar, I could see the crooked smile of satisfaction on their faces. It wasn't joy over the inheritance, but pleasure in seeing me once again in an inferior position. It was the kind of look that, if I described it aloud, someone would call an exaggeration, but I've known those looks since I was a child. I knew exactly what they meant. My cousin Helena, always too elegant for emotional situations, walked over to my mother, who was quiet, as always, and said something I couldn't hear, but it was clear from the movement of her lips. "I'm sorry about him. He, in this case, was me." She didn't feel much. She never feels it. Helena is the type of person who uses compassion as makeup. It only works if someone is watching. And then, in a corner of the room, almost hidden behind a bookcase, I heard my aunt whisper to another relative, "I told you. He would never care about that one. That one. You. Nobody. Zero. Someone who was only there because they didn't have the courage to be absent." These whispers were nothing new, but in that environment, in that context, they carried a different weight. It was as if all the masks my family insisted on wearing had given way, one by one, revealing what had always been behind them: the hope of profit, the desire for superiority, the conviction that some there were more family than others. And irony, they thought they were hiding it well. The truth is, my relatives were never good at hiding their true selves. They believed so much in their own importance that they forgot to control their expressions. The raised eyebrows, the crooked smiles, the way they looked away whenever I crossed the room, it all spoke for them. The room was silent, but the whole atmosphere screamed. It was in that silence that I realized something profound, something I already felt, but which became completely clear there. That's when I realized they already knew what they were going to win. They weren't surprised by anything. They weren't shocked by the properties, the assets, the values. They were not impressed with the decisions in the will. They were simply confirming what they had believed for years, that my father would reward those who, according to them, were the true heirs, those who conformed to the family's expectations, those who lived as if the inheritance were a guaranteed medal. I looked around and began to see the pieces falling into place. The frequent visits to my father's house, not out of affection, but strategic. The concerned conversations they insisted on having in front of him. The rehearsed acts of kindness, the exaggerated hugs, the compliments that always came with a second glance to confirm he had heard. None of that was spontaneous. It was an investment carefully planned for years, every gesture calculated, every word thought out. every appearance at Sunday lunch strategically used as a seed to be harvested in the future, on the day the will was read. And as I watched that scene, that poorly staged play, I felt something strange inside me. It wasn't envy, it wasn't anger, it was a kind of bitter clarity, as if I finally understood that, all these years, they hadn't been competing with me. They never saw me as part of the game. I was the extra in the story they'd constructed in their heads, the forgettable one, the inexpressive one, the unimportant one. And perhaps, for them, the recorded message my father left was merely confirmation of that. But I still hadn't heard anything. They didn't know, and neither did I, that the message held something none of them could have imagined. However, right there, in that specific moment, before any revelation, all I could feel was this stark truth. They thought they had won. They thought they already knew how the story ended. They thought I was just the name the lawyer would mention out of obligation, to fulfill protocol. The break was over. The lawyer called everyone back to the table. When I sat down again, I understood something I hadn't realized before. Their masks were slipping, but the biggest revelation of that afternoon was yet to come, and it wouldn't be about them. It would be about me, and about what my father really left for me. When the intermission ended, we returned to the room as if returning to a stage. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. That moment was the climax of the show. The lawyer sat at the head of the table, carefully arranged the stack of papers with almost ritualistic precision, and looked at each of us with a short, firm gaze, too professional to be appropriate in such an emotional setting. "Let's continue," he said, his voice neutral, almost mechanical. The sound of the air conditioner filled the seconds of silence as he ran his fingers across the pages, searching for the exact spot where he had stopped. Then he began. First came the formal parts, the legal phrases, the terms that seemed to be in another language, the declarations that the will had been written in full awareness of one's own free will, revoking any previous document. He read it precisely, without emotion, like someone reciting something they've done hundreds of times. For him, it was just another day at work. For us, it was the day the family's history would change direction. Nobody paid much attention to those details. You could see in their eyes that the focus was on, when will the interesting part arrive? Some drummed their fingers on the table, others fiddled with their cell phones, disguising their anxiety. My Aunt Clara, however, listened to every word with her body leaning forward, as if she wanted to ensure that nothing was overlooked, especially something that could benefit her. Then finally, reading began to gain content. "Regarding the property located on such and such street, number such and such," said the lawyer, "it is intended for Mrs. Clara." I saw the sparkle in her eyes light up immediately. She placed her hand on her chest as if receiving an award. The beach house. The house that was my father's pride and joy, where he spent his holidays, where he took smiling photos that I barely remembered seeing in my childhood. That house, overlooking the sea, now had an owner, officially and legally. "As well as all the furniture and belongings inside," the lawyer added. She could barely hide her smile. She didn't thank my father silently. She didn't look up. She simply adjusted her necklace again, as if the inheritance were merely confirmation of what was already evident, that she had always seen herself as the closest, the most deserving. Then came the name, Arthur. "To Mr. Arthur, I leave the commercial property located at—" My cousin raised his chin, satisfied. It was a large building, a source of stable income. I knew this because, however distant I was from the family's financial decisions, that building always came up in conversations as a symbol of security. Arthur smiled slightly, like someone who finally receives what he has long considered his own. The lawyer continued, now at an almost musical pace. "Land, financial investments, shares in companies, family heirlooms, antique paintings, appraised and catalogued." Each phrase seemed like a step on a ladder that only went up. With each good deed declared, the importance increased, and with each name called, faces lit up with relief and triumph. "To my eldest son, I leave the house where I currently reside, along with the adjacent land and its respective improvements. To my middle son, I leave the shares and stakes in companies X, Y, and Z, as well as the income derived therefrom. I leave the art collection and historical pieces to Helena, so that they may be preserved and, if she so wishes, exhibited." Each time a name was mentioned, there was a slight movement in the room. A sigh, an adjustment of posture, a look of satisfaction. Some even risked a wry smile, as if they wanted to be discreet, but couldn't completely hide their pleasure. I, on the other hand, remained motionless, because up until that moment, my name hadn't been mentioned. I listened to each sentence with a mixture of detachment and total attention. It was as if I were watching a movie, but also being a part of it. I knew one thing. My father wasn't a disorganized man. He wouldn't do anything by chance. If he hadn't mentioned it to me yet, there was a reason. At least, that's what I kept repeating to myself to avoid letting the humiliation take over. But as I read on, I couldn't ignore the feeling of exclusion. It felt like I was sitting in a room where everyone's future was being sealed, except mine. The lawyer turned page after page. The stack of papers on the right was dwindling, and that inevitably meant the will was coming to an end. And that end was fast approaching. People were already starting to mentally plan their next steps. I could see it. Arthur was looking at his cell phone, probably calculating how much he could earn renting out the commercial property. My aunt was whispering something about renovating the beach house, modernizing the kitchen, enjoying the summer. My brothers exchanged glances that said it all. One had inherited the main house, the other the main businesses. In their eyes, my father's legacy was divided where it really mattered, between them. And me? I remained a spectator. The lawyer continued, now in a slightly lighter tone, as if he were reaching the final part, the part where the smaller assets, the details, the personal belongings would be distributed, watches, souvenirs, small collections, books, things that, while having emotional value, didn't carry the weight of an estate. Even so, my name didn't appear. A discomfort began to grow at the back of my throat, as if a knot were forming and refused to dissolve. My mother, sitting beside me, avoided looking directly at me. Instead, she kept her eyes lowered, her hands clasped in her lap, pressing them together as if she were praying silently. And perhaps she was. With each new asset declared, I felt the contrast more clearly. They received it. I was watching. They were called. I was listening. For a moment, a part of me wondered if my father had truly decided not to leave anything. If that recorded message was, in fact, a short farewell, a weak attempt to replace what, in the eyes of the world, would be interpreted as rejection. And that thought hurt more than I'd like to admit. Until, suddenly, the lawyer's rhythm changed. He paused. He took a deep breath. He looked directly in my direction, even if only for a few seconds. And then he said, "Finally." Her voice trailed off slightly. "As for your youngest son?" The silent room breathed along with me. Everyone looked at me, some with genuine curiosity, others with disdain, others with that kind of interest you feel when you watch someone stumble. I felt my heart race. It was the first time, in that entire reading, that I heard my name being hinted at. But, before revealing what was due to me, the lawyer rearranged the papers again, as if separating that part from the rest. At that moment, it became clear. What would come next would not simply be another item on the list. It would be different. And I still didn't know if different was better or worse. I only knew one thing. Until then, I had only been an observer during the reading of the will. But from that moment on, I would finally be part of the story, even if that part started with something that no one in that room would consider a real inheritance. When the lawyer finally mentioned the youngest son, the air in the room seemed to split in two. It was as if everyone had held their breath at the same time, not because they cared about me, but because they wanted to know what my father, that meticulous, traditional, and unpredictable man, had in store for me after distributing houses, businesses, investments, and properties to everyone else. The lawyer stared at the papers. For a few seconds, that seemed far too long. He ran his index finger along the line of the document, backtracked slightly, checked again, as if he were verifying something that didn't make much sense even to him. When he finally found the exact passage, he looked up, cleared his throat, and adjusted his glasses. And then, in a tone he hadn't used with anyone else in that room, he said, "For you, there is only one item." The sentence fell like a glass shattering on the floor. No one reacted. Immediately. No one blinked. For a few seconds, there was only a thick, uncomfortable, almost cruel silence. There is only one item. Only. Just one. That word seemed to have been placed there on purpose, like a needle stuck in the flesh. Some family members exchanged quick, almost electric glances. It was possible to see the glint of judgment invade their faces, a glint that mixed surprise, satisfaction, and a certain kind of malicious pleasure. Arthur couldn't suppress a smile. It wasn't, an open smile, but a small, calculated one, full of venom. He discreetly turned his face back, as if trying to control his expression, but not enough. My Aunt Clara let out a sigh that, though it seemed like pity, was pure relief, relief that nothing she had received would be threatened. Helena's eyes widened slightly, as if she found it unfair, but, at the same time, inevitable. My brothers, they didn't even try to hide it. The oldest one let out a short, drawn-out nasal hum, as if to say, I knew. The other smiled with closed lips, shaking his head as if observing an expected result from an obvious experiment. I felt my face getting hot, but I didn't lower my head. Not at that moment. The lawyer then continued, "The item was left in a box." He paused briefly, and this time his eyes returned to me, with clear instructions that it must be delivered only to you. He put the briefcase aside and opened a drawer in the cabinet behind him. From inside, he took out a small box, no bigger than an average book. There was no ribbon, no luxurious details. It was a simple, rectangular box with wear that betrayed its age. The lid had a diagonal scratch that almost formed a kind of scar. The looks on my face shifted from curiosity to astonishment, and then quickly to sarcasm. I could hear the whispers even though they were trying to be discreet. Just that. It doesn't even seem like he was his son. An old box? There must be an old photo, or a letter. Nothing important. And the giggles. Ah, those echoed like tiny blades. That muffled, almost childlike laugh, but laden with adult cruelty. The typical laugh of someone who enjoys the taste of victory more than the victory itself. The kind of laugh that hurts more because of the context than the sound. The box was placed on the table right in front of me, and everyone leaned in, without even realizing it, as if the box had some kind of magnetism that attracted attention. Not so much because of its importance, but because of its strangeness. The lawyer, now speaking in a lower voice, said, "There's a device inside. A pin drive and also an old device." My heart raced. An old device? What did that mean? An old cell phone? A tape recorder? A kind of memory that my father kept for years? But before I could reach out to touch the box, another wave of whispers began. A USB drive? It must be something sentimental. Or perhaps nothing more than a cheap souvenir. And then came the cruelest comment, and clear. Enough for me to hear. Sometimes a father gives his son exactly what he deserves. The silence that followed was even heavier. But I didn't look at whoever said it. It wasn't worth it. I kept my eyes on the box, and somehow, in that instant, something inside seemed to pulse, as if it had a life of its own. I couldn't explain it, but there was something different about that box. Something that didn't fit with the casual way everyone reacted. A part of me, the part that had lived with my father, more closely than they ever imagined, knew that he would never do anything without purpose. The box could be small, simple, as glamour, but for some reason that I didn't fully understand, I felt that she was important. Important in a way that my relatives, with all their hunger for possessions and wealth, would never be able to comprehend. The lawyer, sensing the tense atmosphere, added, "Your father requested that this item be given only to you. No one else was allowed to open, listen to, or read its contents." He was very clear about this. The word clear echoed through the room, and the sarcasm on the faces of the others lessened somewhat, not out of compassion, but out of distrust. It was as if, for the first time that afternoon, they had a feeling they didn't want to admit, that perhaps there was something in the box that they couldn't classify, predict, or control. I extended my hand. I touched the lid of the box. The coldness of the wood ran like a thin line across my skin. Everyone watched. Everyone waited. The silence was absolute, and as my fingers closed around the small box, I felt, with a certainty that made no sense, that this was no consolation. It wasn't leftover. It wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was a beginning, and I still had no idea what I was about to discover when I opened that box and pressed the play button. But there, at that specific moment, one thing became clear to me, as clear as the veiled humiliation in the room. My father didn't let me down. He left me with something different, and difference in that family has always been the greatest mystery. When the lawyer pushed the small box toward me, the whole room seemed to shrink around me. It wasn't a heavy box. It wasn't shiny. It didn't have ribbon. It didn't have anything that resembled the kind of inheritance everyone there was expecting. It was just a worn wooden rectangle, with a lid that creaked slightly when I ran my fingers over it, and yet I felt like I was holding a spotlight pointed only at me. No one said anything aloud, but the humiliation didn't need words to exist. It was in the way my relatives looked at me, as if confirming there, in front of the lawyer, that I was indeed the least important, the forgotten son, the one who never fit into my father's grandiose plans. It was almost like watching the conclusion of a story that everyone already knew, except me. My Aunt Clara leaned back in her chair and let out an exaggerated sigh, as if finally relaxing after receiving confirmation of something she had been waiting for a long time. Well, at least no one can say he was left with nothing, she murmured in a tone of feigned compassion that sounded more cruel than any laughter. Some chuckled softly. They laughed at the comment. They laughed at the situation. They laughed at me. It wasn't a loud, unrestrained laugh, but rather that kind of restrained, nervous, and satisfied laugh, typical of someone who doesn't want to seem malicious, just realistic. Arthur, leaning back in his chair, crossed his legs and said, "Look, on the bright side, it's easier to carry home." 2 people laughed. A third person put their hand to their mouth, pretending to cough. I knew it was mockery. I always knew when the joke was about me, even if my name wasn't mentioned. My brothers didn't say anything, but the expression on their faces was enough. The oldest had that crooked smile of someone who feels victorious, as if he were watching a rival lose a race that, for him, had already been decided before the start. The middle one, in turn, avoided eye contact with me. He fixed his eyes on the table, as if trying to appear neutral. But his posture said it all: relaxed, satisfied, comfortable. Someone who feels threatened doesn't sit like that. The lawyer, noticing the awkwardness, tried to hasten the end of the reading. He spoke of some final provisions, recommendations, formalities, but almost no one was paying attention. The main scene had already happened. Everyone had received their shares, their properties, their investments, their status symbols. And me? I had received a box that they believed was proof that my father had given me less. As he finished reading, I could hear whispers starting from the corners of the room, low voices, cut-off syllables, words I didn't hear in full, but understood from the context. Always distant. He was never very close. Well, you reap what you sow. It was curious. None of them really knew what my relationship with my father was like. They weren't present for the late-night conversations we had. They weren't there for the silences we shared when words couldn't express the weight of the situation. They didn't see the times he showed up unannounced, just to drop something off at home or to ask if I was okay. But that didn't matter. For them, everything boiled down to what was on that piece of paper. And on that paper, it seemed like I'd been left with the bare minimum. I felt my face burning. I didn't know if it was shame, anger, or a mixture of both. My mother, beside me, kept her hands tightly clasped together. I could see her fingers trembling, but she wouldn't look directly at me. It was as if she were afraid of what she would see on my face. Disappointment? Pain? Accusation? For a moment, the question flashed through my mind with the force of a blow. Did my father really think I only deserved this? The question hurt because it wasn't just about the box. It wasn't just about the flash drive, the old device, or whatever was inside. It was about value, about recognition, about the place I held in his heart. And facing the audience that surrounded me, I couldn't avoid this bitter feeling of being measured, weighed, and sentenced as what's worth less. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for a reaction. Maybe they expected me to be embarrassed, to break down, to make a scene, to ask aloud what many there wanted, to hear, "Is that all?" But I didn't give that pleasure to anyone. I held the box with both hands, took a deep breath, and kept a neutral face. Inside, I was falling apart. Outside, I refused to be a spectacle. The lawyer concluded the reading with a formal phrase, stating that copies of the will would be available if anyone wanted them, and spoke about legal deadlines, probate, and bureaucracy. The chairs began to be dragged again. Little by little, each person got up to leave. Some were euphoric, already making plans aloud. Others feigned belated mourning, speaking of longing while simultaneously calculating renovations, rentals, and sales. A distant cousin approached me, lightly touched my arm, and said, "I'm so sorry for all of this." But the way she said it didn't match the phrase. "I'm sorry" sounded more like a, "what a shame," the kind you say when you see someone lose a game, not when you witness an injustice. "He should have been fairer," he added. "At least he should have left something concrete. For her, concrete was that which could be measured, sold, divided, and displayed. For almost everyone there, concrete was synonymous with money. I held the box more firmly. "Sometimes, what's concrete isn't what you can put in your pocket," I replied, unsure if I was defending my father, myself, or simply trying to believe my own words. She smiled politely, but her gaze revealed what she really thought, that I was consoling myself with cheap philosophy, because I hadn't received anything of substance. When we finally left the room, the office hallway seemed far too long. My footsteps echoed, mingled with the sound of heels, laughter, and conversations about real estate, documents, and opportunities. I walked with the box pressed against my chest, as if it were fragile, as if it could break with the slightest bump. In the elevator, the atmosphere was even more awkward. One of my brothers commented, looking at his own reflection in the metal door. Well, at least everything is resolved now, right? Everyone got what they deserved. No one answered, but the silence served as agreement. I swallowed hard. Deep inside, in the back of my mind, the question still echoed, insistently. Did my father really think I only deserved this? But along with that question, another one began to emerge, very small, almost timid. What if it's not quite like that? But at that moment, as I left that building, surrounded by hushed laughter, venomous whispers and stares that pierced me as if I were invisible, all I felt was the pain of public humiliation, a pain I didn't yet know existed, which would be precisely the starting point for the biggest turning point in my life. As everyone began to disperse, still celebrating their achievements as if they had just won a silent competition, I noticed that the lawyer remained seated at the table, waiting for me to approach. He didn't seem rushed or uncomfortable. On the contrary, his gaze had a gravity I hadn't seen before during the reading, as if now, finally, we were getting to the truly delicate part of the will. The room, once full and noisy, gradually emptied. One door slammed, another opened, footsteps echoed down the hallway. The yellowish light of the office cast long shadows on the walls, shadows that flickered as if silent witnesses to something about to happen. When the last family member left, leaving behind only the echo of distant giggles, the lawyer took a deep breath and beckoned me with a subtle gesture of his hand. I approached with the box still clutched to my chest. It was almost instinctive, as if, despite everything, I was afraid someone would try to snatch it from me at the last minute. He noticed my hesitation and offered me a chair. I sat down slowly, feeling my whole body tense, as if I were about to receive news that would change everything I thought I knew about my father. The lawyer adjusted the papers in front of him, but didn't look at them. Looked at me. Direct, firm, without that professional neutrality he had maintained throughout the reading. "Before you go," he began, his voice lower, "there's something you need to understand about this box." My heart raced. He paused long enough for me to realize that word choice was important. "Your father left clear instructions. Very clear." He touched the lid of the box carefully, as if the object itself were too delicate. He insisted that the contents not be shared with anyone. I frowned. That sounded strange. Why? What was in that box that warranted such secrecy? The lawyer carefully opened the lid. The old wood creaked slightly, and a faint smell, a mixture of old dust and something vaguely familiar, escaped the air. Inside, lying on a small blue cloth that must have belonged to my father many years ago, was an ordinary, black, unmarked flash drive. Next to it, an old cell phone, one of those models that are no longer used, with a scratched screen and a small crack in the corner. And it was at that moment, upon seeing the device, that I felt a shiver run down my spine. It wasn't just any cell phone. I was familiar with that model. My father had one exactly like it, years ago. The lawyer took the device delicately, as if handling something of emotional value, and placed it in my hands. I felt its weight, not physical, but symbolic. That object was part of my father's life, part of something he had kept for a long time, something that, for some reason, he decided to give only to me. "There's a message here," the lawyer said. A voicemail, recorded shortly before his death. I swallowed hard. I fiddled with my old cell phone between my fingers, trying to understand what was happening. "He said the message was for you and you alone," he continued. "I wasn't authorized to reproduce it. I can't listen. I can't transcribe it. I can only deliver it." The words pounded inside my head like hammer blows. Only you. Why? Why me? If the goal was to leave a message for the family, why not mention it while reading? If it was a farewell, why not include it in the main will? And if it was something important, why trust me specifically? The lawyer noticed my confusion and added, "He was very specific. He asked you to listen, alone, in a place where you could be at peace, in peace." My father never used that expression with me. He never spoke to me like that before. And yet, even in his absence, he seemed closer than he had ever been in life. I put the flash drive in my pocket, still not understanding its purpose. Maybe it contained documents, photos, additional recordings, some clue, or maybe it was just a memento, something symbolic. But the cell phone, that old cell phone, carrying a final voicemail, it had weight. It had intention. "If I may offer some advice," the lawyer said in an almost paternal tone, "don't listen to this here. Not in the car. Not with anyone around. He wanted you to have a moment, to yourself." I looked at him, trying to decipher if there was any hidden meaning in that recommendation, but he only offered a brief, sad, sincere smile. "Sometimes," he said, "what a person saves to say at the end of their life is not something they would want the rest of the world to know." The words hung in the air. I could feel them in my chest, as if they were pushing my heart against my ribs. Why would my father trust me with something he hasn't trusted anyone else? What was there that couldn't be divided? A secret? A request? A confession? And perhaps the most painful question of all, why did he only find the courage to say that after he was no longer here? I kept the box more carefully than any other object I've ever owned. I stood up slowly, as if my muscles were reacting to the weight of responsibility. Before I reached the door, the lawyer called me again, and, he said hesitantly, "Strange as it may seem, I think your father expected you to know exactly why this item is only yours." I stopped, but I didn't answer. Because the truth was this: I had absolutely no idea. As I left the room, clutching that box which seemed much larger than it actually was, I had the feeling that something dark and profound was about to emerge from the past. Something my father had tried to hide for years, perhaps decades. Something that, for some reason, he only confided in me. And deep down, a single question echoed, insistent, burning like embers. Why was I the only one to receive something so different? I had no answer. Yet. But she was about to hear his voice, one last time. And this message would change everything. When I finally left the lawyer's office, the air outside felt different, heavier, denser, as if the whole world had realized I was carrying something that didn't belong there, something that demanded silence, care, and courage. The box in my hands felt heavier than when it was delivered, not because of its actual weight, but because of its meaning, because of the mystery, because of the feeling that my father had left me a door ajar to something he never had the courage to say in life. The hallway of the building echoed with my footsteps. Talk, talk, talk. Each step seemed to be in rhythm with my short breaths. Breathe, hold on, breathe. I wasn't running, but I felt like my whole body was fleeing from something, or running towards something I didn't yet understand. When I stepped into the elevator, the metal door slammed shut with a dry thud, clang. The sound reverberated, like a blow. The elevator began to descend slowly, and for the first time, I looked at my reflection in the mirrored surface. I looked pale. My hands were trembling. The box pressed against my chest felt like an extra organ, as if it were beating along with my heart. The silence inside was absolute. No music, without voices, only the muffled sound of the elevator machinery, and ultimately, the constant pulse of my own breath. When the door opened on the ground floor, the lobby seemed distant, as if it were in another reality. People came and went, laughing, talking, leading normal lives that didn't involve old cell phones containing hidden messages left by recently deceased parents. I crossed the lobby almost without noticing. The outside noise, cars passing, horns honking, idle chatter, sounded muffled, as if it were distant from me. Everything was too slow, as if I had been pushed into a deep lake and now saw the world through the water. In the parking lot, my hand failed me. Twice before I managed to press the button to unlock the car. Beep, beep. The familiar sound should have been comforting, but that afternoon it echoed like a warning. I got into the vehicle, placed the box on the passenger seat, and stood there for a few seconds, just staring at it. She seemed alive, button, full of intentions. Why only me? The question kept nagging at me. My father had left me with many questions throughout my life, but none as big as this one. What was there that couldn't be? Revealed with everyone present? What needed to be said only to me at the end of his life? I turned the key. The sound of the engine filled the air, but it didn't bring me comfort. The road to my house seemed endless. The traffic lights took longer. The cars went slower. My thoughts raced too fast. While driving, memories began to surface without permission. The first time I saw my father cry, alone in the backyard, thinking no one was watching him. The day he disappeared for hours and came back, with red eyes, saying only, "Everything is fine." The conversations were interrupted whenever I entered the room. the long silences at the table, the way he sometimes looked at me, as if he saw something he couldn't put into words, and then, more recently, the way he seemed restless before he fell ill, as if there was something urgent to resolve and he knew that time was running out. These memories crashed inside me like sudden waves. I tried to push them away, but the more I tried to ignore them, the stronger they became. Clack. The sound of the tires going over a small speed bump brought me back to the present. I took a deep breath and kept driving. The drive home usually took about 20 minutes, but that day it felt like a lifetime. Every sign, every corner, every traffic light made me more uneasy. The feeling that something was about to be revealed grew with each kilometer. When I finally parked in the garage, my legs felt like rubber. I turned off the car and stood there too, afraid to pick up the box. It remained there, silent, but with an invisible power that seemed to pull me in. I took 3 deep breaths before I managed to grab it. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. The sound of my footsteps on the sidewalk sounded different. Tok, tok, tok. It echoed unevenly, as if the emotional weight was interfering even with the way I walked. When I opened the front door, the silence inside hit me like a cold wave. No noise, no presence. A safe place, or, at that moment, the only place where I could truly press the play button. I placed the box on the living room table. The sound of the wood hitting the surface resonated louder than it should have. I sat facing it. The walls seemed to move closer, as if they were leaning in to listen too. My hands were sweating. My chest hurt. My heart felt like it was trying to escape through my ribs. I straightened my posture, took a deep breath, and opened the box again. The cell phone was there. Old, scratched, frozen in time. Ayo. Simple object, but laden with my father's last living thought. I picked up the device. I felt its weight in my hand. I ran my finger across the dark screen. A phrase echoed inside me, involuntarily. I was expecting a farewell, but what I heard changed everything. But I still hadn't heard anything, and that made the phrase even more frightening, because it was as if I already knew that the device contained something that wasn't just a goodbye, a secret, a revelation, a truth that my father kept locked away for years, perhaps for his entire life. I sat more firmly in the chair. I adjusted my posture. The silence around me became immense. My breathing echoed as if I were in a cave. My heart was beating too fast. The sound of my hand squeezing the phone sounded like a snap in the air. And then, with one last deep breath, I clicked the button to turn on the screen. The device vibrated weakly, as if waking up after a very long sleep. The voicemail was there, waiting, carrying my father's voice for the last time. I was about to press play. I was about to discover the truth. And deep down, I already knew. Nothing that followed would be simple. Nothing would be easy. Nothing was expected. The message I was about to hear, I would change everything. The old cell phone rested in my hand like a piece of the past that had survived time. The scratched screen reflected only a distorted shadow of my face, and for a second, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to postpone that moment, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of respect, perhaps because I wasn't ready to hear the voice of someone I would never hear again in my life. Another part, however, pulsed with urgency. Discover. Now. I pressed the side button. The screen lit up in a faint bluish tone, as if the device itself were resurfacing after years of dormancy. The message list was short, almost empty. Just one entry, a recording, a simple title, For him. My heart stopped for half a second. For him. It didn't have my full name. It didn't have a date. It wasn't formal at all. It was intimate, direct, almost secret. I swallowed hard. My finger trembled above the play button. And then I pressed play. The phone took a few moments to respond, as if it were gathering strength to deliver what it was carrying. And when the audio finally started, it was weak, scratchy, and full of interference. I had to hold the device very close to my ear to be able to distinguish anything. For a moment, I only heard noises, breathing, a distant hiss, the sound of someone fiddling with the device. And then, suddenly, as if the voice were traveling through a tunnel, his voice appeared, weak, tired, trembling, but unmistakable. The voice wavered, more hissing, and then, my boy. My chest tightened instantly. My boy. That was the nickname he used for me when I was a child, a name that had disappeared when I was still 12 or 13 years old, a name he never used again, not even once, in his adult life. Hearing that, said with such weakness, hit me like an unexpected emotional blow. It was as if, for a second, I had gone back in time. as if I were sitting on the porch with him, my feet dangling in the air, listening to him say, "My boy," after teaching me something I hadn't understood in school. The audio continued. "If you're hearing this, it means that I didn't have time." He coughed, a dry, heavy cough that grated on my ears and my soul. I wanted to say it looking into your eyes, but I failed at that. I failed at so many things. With you. I closed my eyes. My breath became short. It wasn't about possessions. It wasn't about property. It wasn't about any of the items that had made my relatives smile that afternoon. It was about something else. He took a deep breath on the other end of the line, audible even through the weak recording. "I don't want you to think that you've stopped being important to me. Don't let them make you believe that." My entire body became immobile. The word carried centuries of weight, of meanings, of silences. You've always been different," he continued, not unlike in a bad way, but in a way that I could never protect myself from. My throat tightened. I wanted to reply. I wanted to talk to him. I wish I could listen to that audio and go back in time. "I know what they're thinking," he said, his voice firming for a few seconds. "I know what they say when they think you're not listening." My blood ran cold. Suddenly, everything made sense. The constant feeling of being the odd one out in the family, the way they treated me. The conversations were interrupted, the sideways glances, the veiled exclusion. He knew. He always knew. But you deserve to hear the truth. From me. The word true. It made the whole room seem smaller, as if the walls were closing in. My breathing became heavy. My hands started to sweat. "It's not about inheritance." His voice dropped to a whisper. It never was. My heart stopped for a moment. I knew. I already knew. The box was not leftovers. It was no cheap consolation. It was something else. "It's about who you are." A chill ran down my entire spine. He breathed again, with difficulty, almost choking. "I never knew how to protect you from this. But now, you need to know the truth." My body became completely still, as if time had frozen. I could hear more static, as if the phone was struggling to keep the file active. "When you're finished listening, go to the flash drive," he said. There it is. The part I never had the courage to tell. My heart raced. Everything started to make sense, and at the same time, nothing did. For a second, his voice disappeared. Silence. Chiado. More silence. I almost thought the message was over when suddenly he returned. Weaker, more distant, but carrying a weight that crushed my chest. "My boy, I'm so sorry for everything. You'll understand. Don't hate me. Please." And then, as if pulled away, his voice dissolved into static, hissing. "The recording has finished." I held the phone for long seconds without moving a muscle. I didn't blink. He wasn't breathing properly. I wasn't thinking. I could only feel it. I felt the weight of that message as if I were being pushed down by an invisible force. It wasn't about possessions. It wasn't about fortune. It wasn't about favoritism. It was about a truth that my father had kept his whole life. And now, finally, he had placed it in my hands. And in that absolute silence that filled the room after the audio ended, everything inside me trembled, because a certainty overwhelmed me with devastating force. I had no idea what the pen drive was hiding. Whatever it was, it would change my entire family history and the whole story of my life. I stood there for a few seconds after the audio ended, still holding the phone to my ear, as if I waited a little longer, he would speak again. But the screen went dark. The recording was over. On the other end, there was no one. Left. Just silence. Silence. And a USB drive. His phrase kept hammering in my head. "When you're finished listening, go to the flash drive." I looked at the open box on the table. The small black flash drive was there, motionless, as if insignificant. But now I knew that inside there weren't just cold files. There was context. There was justification. There was, somehow, the continuation of that tired voice I had just heard. I picked up the flash drive carefully, as if it could break with any sudden movement. I stood up slowly and went to the bedroom where my laptop was. The sound of my own footsteps echoed through the empty house. Talk, talk, talk. Everything seemed louder. My breathing, the click of the door, the scraping of the chair. It was as if the whole world was suspended, waiting for what I was about to discover. I opened the laptop, plugged in the flash drive, and waited for the device to be recognized. The loading time seemed like an eternity. When the folder finally appeared on the screen, my heart raced. There was only one folder, with the name, for him, the same title as the voicemail. He had prepared everything, with intention, with planning. I opened the pasta. Inside, some files. A text document named Read First. Some scanned photos. Several PDFs containing company names, dates, and case numbers. And one more audio file. For a moment, I didn't know where to begin, but the very name of the first file left no doubt. I clicked on Read First. The document opened, and as I read the first few lines, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was a letter, typed, but with his voice in every word. My boy, if you're reading this, it means you've already heard my message on the phone. I wasn't the father you deserved, but at least once in my life, I want to be the man you need me to be. Someone who tells you the truth. My chest tightened. I continued reading. Everything you saw today in the reading of the will, the houses, the properties, the businesses, you need to understand where it came from. They celebrate the inheritance as if it were a reward for being good children, good relatives. But the truth is that a large part of this fortune was built in the worst possible way. My heart raced. I could feel the pulse in my temples. In the beginning, I just wanted to give you a better life. I accepted shady partnerships, turned a blind eye to deals I knew were corrupt, money without a clean origin, deals that left other families in misery. I always told myself it was just a phase, that I would fix everything later. But the money came in and never left. And, when I realized it, much of what you saw being distributed today was tainted. I looked away from the screen for a second. Part of me didn't want to continue. Another part, I couldn't stop. If it were just about me, I would burn everything. But they grew up within it, and over time, they became even worse than me. They manipulated, lied, threatened me. Yes, your uncle, your cousins, your brothers, everyone at some point participated in decisions to keep that money, including turning against you. My throat felt tight. Against me? I continued. You were always different. You questioned things. You didn't accept everything silently. You didn't sell yourself easily. And that, for me, was always a source of pride. For them, it wasn't. They considered you a problem, someone who could hinder a future plan, convince you to sign things, exclude you from decisions, prevent you from participating in any way. A cold shiver ran down my spine. They went so far as to do something you never knew. My hands trembled on the keyboard. A few years ago, you probably remember signing a piece of paper your brother brought you. He said it was to sort out some family paperwork, something quick, unimportant. Maybe you were tired, maybe you wanted to avoid an argument. You signed it, trusting him. I remember. I remember the sheet. I remember the pen. I remember the hurried request, the phrase, "It's a simple thing, just to get things sorted out." I had no idea what it was. It wasn't simple. It was an authorization, a maneuver to legally strip you of any rights over one of the company's parts. They used your name, your signature, and pressured me to accept. They said you didn't have the head to handle large sums of money, that you would only get in the way. I let it happen. I left. I pulled my hands away from the keyboard as if the laptop was on fire. The room spun for a moment. I rested my elbows on my knees and took a deep breath. They had staged a coup against me, and my father knew. I had allowed it. I continued reading, my eyes burning. I tried to fix it later. When I got sick, I thought I'd have time to reorganize everything, to give you back what they took. But I was threatened, directly. They said that if I touched anything, they would involve you, blame you, expose you. You had no idea, but you were being used as a blackmail tool. I was afraid something would happen to you. The letters began to blur. I blinked several times, wiping away the tears that insisted on falling. I can't change what I did. I can't undo the signature. I can't go back in time. But I can give you the one thing they never wanted you to have, the truth. At that point, the text indicated, "Stop reading for a moment. Open the audio file called Final." I went back to the folder. There it was, final.mp3. I clicked. Again, his voice. Weak. Scratched. Ravine. "If you've made it this far," he began, breathless, "so you already know that I left you alone in many things. I failed, my boy. I failed to protect you from them, and even from myself." I stood still, listening. I let them take what was rightfully yours. I accepted their version of events. I settled into the wealth I had built, even knowing it was mixed with blood, tears, and injustice. A heavy silence, followed by labored breathing. They received money. His voice deepened, almost a hoarse whisper. You received the truth. The phrase pierced me like a knife, not said with pride, not even with superiority, but with regret. I know this seems like a small thing now. I know that in the lawyer's office they must have laughed at you, thought you got nothing. But listen, the truth is the only thing that can truly set you free from them. The money they have is prison, chains, a commitment to what is dirty. You, at least, can choose another path. He coughed again. A long, difficult cough. No pen drive, he continued with effort. It has copies of contracts, transaction records, negotiations. It has everything. If one day you decide you want justice, or at least want to get away for good, this is what will protect you. It's the proof of what they did, against me and against you. I stared at the laptop screen. There were the PDFs, the company names, the dates, the documents. Suddenly, they weren't just files anymore. They were weapons. They were mirrors. They were the portrait of a family built on lies. On the other end of the recording, he continued, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to understand. Maybe you hate me. Maybe you never want to hear my name again. I deserve that. But there was one thing I couldn't let them take from you. The chance to know what kind of place you really grew up in. What dirty game they tried to involve you in. His voice grew even weaker. The rest is your decision. If you burn those files and turn the page, I'll still understand. If you use this to defend yourself, that too. But please. There was a short silence, and then he repeated more quietly, please. Don't think you're worth less because they left with signed papers and assets in their name. They kept the rotten part. You kept the only part that can still be cleaned up. The audio started to hiss louder. I knew it was coming to an end. My boy, I'm sorry. For what I did. For what I failed to do. For the father I wasn't able to be. I didn't have the courage to look you in the eyes and confess all of this. So, I leave my cowardice in the form of a file. But I also leave a door. The door to the truth. Another heavy breath. One last effort. I don't know if you can believe this now, but I've always been proud of you. Precisely because you never wanted to be like them. You never wanted to live based on what wasn't right. You are the only one who can still break this cycle. And then, the last sentence, almost inaudible. Be free from that, even if I haven't been. The audio cut out. I stood there motionless, headphones still in my ears, staring at the screen, seeing nothing. Outside, a car drove by. A dog barked in the distance. The refrigerator made a soft hum in the kitchen. The world went on as if nothing had happened. But inside that small house, inside that file folder, inside that broken heart, everything had changed. My family had received money. I had received the truth. And for the first time in my life, I realized the weight and the power of that difference. I was still sitting in front of my laptop when I realized my hands were shaking, not just from the impact of what I had just discovered, but because an unsettling feeling had begun to grow in the back of my mind. Something wasn't quite right. The voicemail spoke the truth. The documents spoke of a sordid past. The evidence revealed what they had done to me. But my father wasn't the kind of man to leave something unfinished. If he had left me a flash drive, if he had left me such a personal message, so laden with guilt and intent, then that couldn't be all. I slowly closed the laptop and looked back at the box on the living room table. The box, which at that moment seemed almost to glow, a silent and insistent presence, as if it had been calling me back from the very beginning. I had taken out my cell phone. I had removed the USB drive, but I hadn't checked the bottom of the box. I moved the chair closer, dragged the box closer, and for the first time since I got home, I noticed that there was a small internal compartment, almost imperceptible, made of a lighter-colored piece of wood, hidden under the blue fabric where the pen drive had rested. My heart raced. I ran my finger along the outline of the compartment. It was so thin that I could swear that if I hadn't been looking for something, I would never have noticed it. Carefully, I pulled the edge. The small wooden panel lifted up and revealed a hidden space. Inside, folded into 4 parts, was an old envelope, yellowed at the edges, and next to it, a small metal keychain, heavy, cold, with 2 items attached, an old key and a small card with a handwritten numerical code. The envelope in bold letters read, "For my boy, only when he has heard everything." The same handwriting as my father's, the same way he spelled my nickname that he used when I was a child. I felt my throat close up. I removed the envelope from the compartment and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, but a different letter from the first one. Shorter, more direct, most urgent. And as I read, I realized that it wasn't just an addition, it was the true revelation. Era, what came after the truth, the gift that only I could receive, because only I had been spared the family's dirty part. The letter began like this: "If you've made it this far into this envelope, it means you've heard everything. And now you understand why I couldn't leave you anything that's in the family name. But that doesn't mean I didn't leave anything of yours behind." My stomach churned. I continued. "Many years before all those deals, when I was still trying to do the right thing, I invested my money, the little I had, in a place I never shared with anyone. I didn't want to involve my mother, my siblings, anyone. I was afraid that if they found out, they would turn it into another bargaining chip." The letter then became more personal. "This place has always been yours, even before you were born. I saved this for you because I knew none of them would think to look for something they couldn't calculate, something that doesn't appear in public documents, something that only exists because I wanted to leave my boy a piece of the world that wasn't dirty." I felt my eyes burning. "The key that's there opens this place. The code is used to access the inner safe, and the address is on the back of this envelope." I turned the envelope over, my hands trembling, and there it was, an address, handwritten, on a rural road, about 2 hours from the city. I continued reading the letter. "Inside this place there is something that no one in your family will ever know how to find, something I kept away from everyone. These are documents, albums, photos, receipts, old contracts, everything that proves I was once a decent man before I got my hands dirty along with them. And, more than that, there's what I left for you. What I left for you." My heart raced. The letter continued. "It's not dirty money. It's not property bought with guilt. This is not a company built on the suffering of others. It's yours, clean, honest, kept for decades." I held my breath. "When you get there, you'll understand why only you could receive this, because only you could continue what I started before I lost myself. You sound silly to me." On paper, he continued, "In the safe, there are 3 items. The documents that prove the original investment, the deed to the property, entirely in your name, and something even more important, a mission." My stomach sank. I know that asking for this after everything is unfair, but I needed someone who had the courage to break the cycle. His brothers wouldn't have had it. His cousins wouldn't have had it. Your aunt, never. But you have it. I've read that sentence at least 4 times. When you open the safe, you'll find a document I wrote more than 15 years ago. It contains details about a project I abandoned when I got lost in the pursuit of easy money, a project that could have changed lives, not destroyed them. I want you to read everything and decide if you want to continue. It's not an obligation. It's not a charge. It's a request. From father to son, a request. From a man who failed, but somehow still wanted to give me something that wasn't toxic. You are the only one who hasn't been corrupted by everything. He's the only one who has the ability to handle this with the right heart. And if you don't want to follow it, just save it. But don't let them find it. This place is yours, and yours alone. Finally, one last line. My boy, this is the gift I wanted to give while I was still here. Patch leaves, and understand who you've always been. Away from them. I folded the letter, my breath catching in my throat. I looked at the key again. It was heavy, old, almost symbolic. The code on the card had 4 digits, the kind of code that could open both a physical safe and something far more significant. The address seemed almost impossible to recognize. A road I had never heard of, an unnamed property number, a place that, apparently, only my father knew existed. And then, suddenly, something became clear, frighteningly clear. The box that everyone laughed at. It wasn't a humiliation. It was a path, a map, a destination. They had received what they wanted. I had received what he wanted. And that right. There was the real gift. A gift that had no market value. It had soul value, true value. I got up, grabbed the key, the envelope, and the box. I was going to that place. I needed to go, because at that moment, I was absolutely certain the true legacy my father left behind. She was hiding away from her family, and he was waiting for me. The silence of the car as I returned from the property, where I found everything my father had promised, felt almost sacred. The key, still in my pocket, weighed how, as if it were made of lead. The envelope with the documents was tucked away in the folder beside me, and the code written on the card seemed to echo in my mind like a secret I could no longer unhear. I needed time. Time to breathe, to understand what had happened, to process the weight of carrying in my hands something that could rewrite my entire family history. But I was not given the time. As soon as I got home, I found 3 cars parked out front. 3 cars I knew well, cars that belonged to the people who least wanted to see me with any kind of power, my 2 brothers, and my Aunt Clara. My blood ran cold. They didn't wait. They did not rest. They did not accept the will. They came after me. When I opened the front door, they were already inside, sitting, standing, pacing back and forth, as if my house were an extension of the rights they believed they had over everything. My older brother was the first to speak. "We need to talk. Now." His voice was low, harsh, full of authority. The same voice he used when he wanted to remind me of the place I should occupy in the family. Aunt Clara crossed her arms, her pearl necklace trembling with her quickened breathing. Arthur leaned against the wall, as always, with that smirk that made me want to scream. And the middle brother, always more politically minded, tried to soften the blow. "Look, we know that you received something." My stomach sank. They already knew. Of course they knew. They always knew everything. They always moved quickly when money, power, or secrets were involved. "The lawyer couldn't hide this from us," my aunt said, her voice thick with indignation. "What did he give you besides that ridiculous little box?" Ridiculous. She still said that. I still believed that. I still thought that was a minor gift. I calmly placed the box on the table. That alone was enough to produce an immediate effect. The eyes of the 3 widened, as if they were finally faced with something they didn't understand. My brother stepped forward. "Did you open it?" he asked, tense. "Did you find anything?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth, the truth that my father entrusted to me, and only to me. "Yes, I found it," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Much more than you ever imagined." My aunt took half a step back. This is unfair," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "Your father couldn't give you anything in secret. This needs to be reviewed. It needs to be evaluated." My older brother approached aggressively. "You have no idea what you're doing. Show us. Now." I didn't move. "No," I replied. That single word made his face change color. "What's that?" he asked, his voice deep and menacing. "It's part of the family inheritance. It's collective." I laughed. A short, almost incredulous laugh. "This isn't part of the family inheritance." "So what is it?" he retorted. My gaze hardened. I took a deep breath and finally said the words that had been burning. Inside me, since the moment I read the letter, "This is what's left of the man you destroyed. The part of him you never touched, and that he kept for me, only for me." The silence that followed was brutal. They weren't expecting that. They expected submission. They expected fear. They expected me to react as I always reacted, quiet, withdrawn, passive. But something had changed. I had changed. The truth had changed me. Arthur stepped forward, attempting a conciliatory tone, but without disguising his haste. "Look, maybe it's best if you let us see. We can figure everything out together." Together. The most deceitful word I've ever heard from that mouth. "You destroyed everything that was clean in our father's history," I said. "And now you want to destroy what he kept away from you?" My aunt lost control. "You're no more special than anyone else here." I slammed my hand on the table. The sound echoed throughout the entire room. They fell silent immediately. "I'm not special," I replied. "I'm just not corrupt." The middle brother, always diplomatic, tried to smile. "We just want to understand, okay? It doesn't have to be like this." I looked him straight in the eyes, and for the first time in his life, he looked away. "Do you want to understand?" I asked. "Then understand this. You got the wealth, I got the truth, and that changes everything." The phrase hung in the air like a sentence. Irrevocable. Final. My brother tried to take another step forward, but I raised my hand and continued. "What my father left for you is in the papers." "And what did he leave for you?" my aunt asked, almost shouting. I got close to her, close enough that she could feel, for the first time, that she was not facing the same person she had always treated as inferior. "He left me what you never had," I replied, my voice low and firm. "Responsibility, truth, and freedom." She stepped back. It literally retreated. The older brother clenched his fists, but did not advance. Arthur finally lost his smile. The other brother was looking at the ground. They understood. Even without knowing the exact content of what I discovered, they understood. There was something big, something serious, something that could change everything if I wanted. And that was enough to scare them. That was all it took to turn the game around. You no longer have power over me, I concluded, nor over what my father left me. And most importantly, they no longer have power over who I am. They tried to argue, to pressure to negotiate, but their voices sounded weak, irrelevant, as if they were speaking through water. They knew they had lost, and one by one they left my house. None of them looked directly at me. None of them had the courage. When the door closed and the silence returned, I took a deep breath for the first time in years. The truth carried enormous weight, but it also had a liberating power. And at that moment, I finally had both. Their wealth was great, but the truth was mine. And that in fact changed everything. When the door finally closed behind the last family member, I felt as if an invisible weight had been lifted from my shoulders, leaving behind a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and a strange sense of rebirth. All my life, I had been pushed into this fated role within the family, the forgotten one, the sidelined one, the one who didn't fit into their expectations. Now, that no longer existed. I stood there for a few seconds in the center of the room, staring into the silence. It wasn't the heavy silence from before, not the silence of doubt or guilt. It was a complete silence, liberating. A silence that seemed to say, "Now it's your turn." I sat back down at the table and ran my fingers along the lid of the box, which was still open. The flash drive, the letter, the key, and the envelope with the address were there, like pieces of a puzzle that had finally been put together, revealing not the image of a treasure, but of a journey. The journey of a man who had indeed made mistakes, but who, in the end, used his last moments of lucidity to try to do something right, something honest, something that would save at least a piece of the life he himself had destroyed with his choices. And, as hard as it was to admit, he had left that piece of furniture for me. I took a deep breath, feeling a decision taking shape within me. Not an impulsive decision, fueled by pain or anger, but a mature choice, perhaps the first in my life not influenced by family pressure or judgment. I knew exactly what that place represented. He knew what the documents kept in the safe meant. I knew the weight of that key in my hands. My father hadn't just left me a hidden inheritance. He had left a chance, a gateway to a new path, a silent plea for me to build something that didn't carry the blood, lies, and corruption that sustained the rest of the family's fortune. I spent the night rereading everything: the long letter, the short letter, the PDFs, the audio, files. I cried when I needed to, silently, like someone who finally understands that the past can no longer be changed, but that the future can, indeed, be rewritten. I felt angry too, deep anger over the lost years, the humiliations, the manipulations. But at the same time, I realized something bigger. I didn't need to carry any of that forward. The following weeks were marked by subtle but profound transformations. I started cutting ties with my family, not aggressively, but firmly. No fights, no arguments, just setting boundaries. Some tried to reconnect when they realized I wouldn't be useful to them. Others completely ignored me, pretending I was an irrelevant detail in their own narrative. And for the first time in my life, I accepted it calmly. I used the address my father left me as a starting point. Restoring that place, a small, simple plot of land, but full of meaning, became a kind of healing ritual. She cleaned the floors, painted the walls, and opened windows that hadn't been opened in decades. With each renovation, it felt like I was also clearing away the accumulated dust inside me. In the safe hidden on the property, I found the most important item my father had mentioned: his blueprint. A social project, completely outside the family's norm, focused on helping small communities, something he started when he was still young, before being consumed by ambition. There were sketches, statutes, unsent letters, contact lists, ideas jotted down on nearly faded pieces of paper. It was like finding the pure version of himself, the version that existed before the corruption, before the dangerous alliances, before his family transformed him into a man he himself came to fear. And there, in that small room lit by a single dim lamp, I realized that was the real gift, not the place, not the key, not the hidden money. It was an opportunity to continue something he hadn't been able to do. It was an invitation to break the cycle. I decided to take on that mission, not out of obligation or guilt, but because for the first time, I felt that something actually made sense. I felt I was honoring the only part of my father that was worth preserving. And I felt that I was honoring my own essence, the one that would never fit into the cold mold of family. I didn't become rich. I didn't inherit mansions or businesses. I didn't receive applause or recognition from my family. But I gained something infinitely rarer. I gained peace. I gained purpose. I gained the freedom to be who I truly was. And looking back at everything I've experienced since the day I read the will, I realized a simple yet profound truth. Inheritance is not just what we receive, it's what we do with what we discover. My father left me with a truth, painful, broken, imperfect, but still, a truth that set me free. And I chose to transform that truth into a new beginning, a beginning that would never have been possible if I had received just another house, another piece of land, another fragment of that dirty legacy. As I closed the door to the renovated property for the first time, I felt the wind rustle through the surrounding trees as if it were a silent signal, a whisper from the past, finally making room for the future. And right there, in that instant, I knew that my father, despite everything, had been right in the end. He gave me what none of them could have borne, the truth, and that truth was what finally set me free. If this story has captivated you this far, leave a like and subscribe. Your support helps me create more intense and twist-filled stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you received only one message in your family's will?